Welcome to a spooktacular edition of the Really Good Films podcast, where we look back at the scary films we've covered recently, but also look forward to what movies are coming to cinemas and streaming soon. Firstly, we'll look at the original review of each film, followed by extra commentary. Don't worry about spoilers, as this podcast is spoiler-free. The films we've covered recently have all had plenty of frights, from the contorted faces of Smile to the horrific hand of Talk to Me, and last but not least, spooky tales galore in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Now we know what's coming up, let's look at the original review of Smile. Smile tells the story of a psychiatrist who, after seeing a bizarre and traumatic incident involving a patient, becomes convinced that she's being threatened by something supernatural. Smile could have easily been an It Follows copycat, and It Smiles, so to speak. Luckily, this horror/thriller sets itself apart enough to be its own original experience. Films like this often falter when they break their logic for dramatic effect, but thankfully, Smile avoids this error entirely. And so, despite a few goofy moments, Smile is worth a watch. In terms of extra thoughts, Smile is, for the most part, a solid horror film. Where it does stumble is when a few of its scare sequences go a little too far, making them silly rather than scary. While this only happens occasionally, going to such extremes before the finale does slightly reduce the ending's impact. On a more positive note, not only does the logic of the film's story stay consistent, but characters always act in a logical manner, allowing us to stay immersed in the film for its entire runtime. While Smile isn't going to blow the minds of horror fans, it is good enough that I am intending on seeing this year's sequel. Our next film takes us to Australia. Let's look at our speedy review of Talk to Me. Talk to Me sees a group of friends conjure spirits with an embalmed hand, but this game goes sour when one of them takes it too far, unleashing supernatural forces. Talk to Me has an excellent premise that immediately engages the viewer. The film is very slick and moves along at a brisk pace, so you're never waiting too long for something spooky to happen. However, its scares are all quite similar, with violence being the most used method to escalate these supernatural events. Despite this minor issue, Talk to Me is a well-made horror film that is worth a watch. I have to say that despite its more aggressive moments, Talk to Me is surprisingly restrained for a horror movie. Possessions never become too outlandish, and we are often given multiple perspectives during these supernatural interactions. While you will feel sympathy for their situation, the characters in Talk to Me can come across as a bit bland. However, the film doesn't come up short in terms of atmosphere, and its cast are also very solid. In the end, Talk to Me is a sharp and scary experience that's worth checking out. The last feature reviewed in this episode is aimed at a younger demographic, but it's still pretty frightening. Let's recap our lightning review of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark sees teenage friends accidentally unleash dark forces when they sneak into a haunted house. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is a fun horror film for teens, featuring several great monsters to scare the viewer. The film brings the creatures to life largely through practical effects, a rare choice these days. Unfortunately, the film can be on the nose with some of its dialogue, and in terms of its overarching story, there's nothing you haven't seen before. However, despite these issues, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is a spooky ride that is worth a watch. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark aims to translate the books written by Alvin Schwartz and illustrated by Stephen Gammell to the big screen. While I haven't read the books, I can say that great care seems to have been taken to make the monsters in the film look as close to the original illustrations as possible. The fact that they are brought to life by performers in suits makes them even more effective, and that true presence is really felt in the final film. Also, despite the overarching story feeling generic, it does bring the stories together in a seamless manner. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is a film that will be a great addition to any Halloween movie marathon. Now that you're all caught up on the recent Really Good Films reviews, let's sample what's coming soon to streaming and cinemas. Smile 2 comes to us on October 18th. This sequel follows pop star Sky Riley, who, on the eve of a world tour, starts experiencing terrifying and inexplicable events. Just a quick warning for those wanting a double bill. I'd suggest avoiding the trailers, as the one I saw spoiled the first film's plot and outlines too much of the sequel's story as well. I will say that, while it's a wise choice to change the setting for the sequel, I'm not sure this will offset the fact that it will be harder to scare us the second time round. Hopefully Smile 2 has a few scary surprises up its sleeve. On the 25th of October, we get Venom, The Last Dance. The third outing for Tom Hardy's Venom series sees Eddie and Venom on the run from both their worlds, and, with the net closing in, they are forced to make a devastating decision that will end the duo's last dance. Hardy seems to be enjoying this dual role of Eddie Brock and Venom. While I haven't seen the prior entries, this version of Venom seems to really make the most out of the character and its human host. The film looks like a lot of fun, and an experience that's best served by a big screen. October 25th also sees the release of The Room Next Door. This film sees two friends who fell out of touch reunite in an extreme but strangely sweet situation. The Room Next Door looks like it will ask difficult questions about human morality in a story with great emotional depth. It's such a treat to see Julianne Moore and Tilda Swinton in such an intimate film that I am sure we'll see tour de force performances from both its leads. The Room Next Door is definitely on my watch list, but perhaps for a time when I'm up for becoming an emotional wreck for 107 minutes. Well, that concludes this episode of the Really Good Films podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you want more from Really Good Films, don't forget to follow us on social media, and of course subscribe to the podcast too, wherever you get your podcasts. We can't wait to review more films for you soon.